I want to welcome you and thank you for being here. One quick thing I wanted to share with you guys that I think is exciting. I know many months ago we started praying about how are we going to continue to reach the city of Hebron in a culture that is now formerly church. It's one of the least church communities in the country, and obviously we need some different strategies. We've been praying about and thinking about that. I shared with you the thought of putting a coffee shop in there during the week that would obviously be functioning not for a profit but to bless the community and provide tutoring spaces and internet for kids and an opportunity to connect with families. And so we did last week receive permission from Porter County to do that, which is really, really cool. And I wanted to let you guys know, you to be the first to know. So, yeah, Monday through Saturday, I believe 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. we'll be hosting a Rise and Roll in there. And that's really, really cool. If you've not had Amish-made donuts, they're pretty good. So, actually really good. So that'll be great, and we're glad to do that. And I want to welcome you back to church and thank you for being here, everybody online, everybody at the Jasper County Jail location, and everybody here at all of our services. I just think that it is so smart to be a part of a local church, but in spite of the evidence, science, and wisdom that shows us that church is one of the greatest ways to find life satisfaction and psychological stability, it's easy to get swept into other things that are less important. And I want to say I'm proud of you, not just for believing in God. That's easy. Obviously, something doesn't come from nothing, but choosing to follow God. And I want to welcome you here again. We are in the third week of our teaching series called The Battlefield of the Mind. And we've been talking about controlling our mind. We started with controlling emotions. Then last week we talked about dealing with doubt. And this week I want to talk about distraction and worry. And I think this is going to be a super helpful and practical week. If you struggle with being distracted or losing focus, if you struggle with worry and controlling what's going on up here, distracting you from what's going on around here, this is going to be helpful. And even if you don't believe that Jesus was God, this is going to be equipping and helpful for you, so I'm excited about this. I want to start with a story. When I was in 8th grade, I was full grown, right? I was same height and weight. I basically looked the same. My mom says I'm aging terribly for a Japanese person, but I can't tell. I think I look pretty much the same as I did in 8th grade. Now, in 8th grade, I tried out for the cross-country ski team, which in Minnesota was a big sport. We had over 100 kids try out for the team. There were 6 varsity spots, and I actually got to make varsity in 8th grade, so I was pretty proud of that. And it was because I was full grown, and for like 6 months, I was tall for my age. You know what I mean? That was kind of cool while it lasted, but it didn't last. So anyway, cross-country skiing is like downhill skiing, but without the chairlift. So, you go up the hill and down the hill and sideways on the hill, and that's what it is, right? And now, cross-country skiing has 2 different styles. There's classic skiing, which is sort of like your Nordic track thing, and then there's skate skiing, where you're like ice skating, but on snow with skis, right? And both styles require 2 different sets of equipment, right? You need a set of skate skis and classic skis. Now, my parents, in their infinite wisdom, and I'm actually really glad that they did this, but they gave us lots of opportunities to earn income. And they said we were responsible to pay for everything in our lives, from like school supplies to clothing to sports equipment, which is why I chose cross-country running and track, because you just have to buy shoes. But winter in Minnesota is like 11 months long, so you got to do something during that time. And so I went out for the ski team. It was a big investment. I remember shopping for equipment, and I was like, I'm going to have to spend $1,000 to get 2 sets of skis. I don't want to do that. That's insane. So I ended up buying a set of what's called combi equipment, which is a combination of skate and classic. And what that means is it's terrible at both of them. It was terrible at both. They didn't work well. And I was decent on the team, and I mean, this is an excuse, but were it not for the equipment, I would have won state for sure. But anyway, for most of human history, like my skis, we've had to try to do everything, right? We had to be hunters, warriors, farmers, carpenters, economists, business people, husbands, fathers, mothers, cooks, counselors, doctors, all in one. Every person had to do all of those things. And the result was subsistence, right? For most of human history, it wasn't a good deal because you, like my skis, were not able to do many things very well, even though you had to do many things. What really changed is what's called farming surplus. As soon as we began producing enough food that not everybody had to be in the process of either gathering food or growing food, people could begin to specialize. And what specializing means is you can become an expert in a specific field. And, this has been key to human success. I mean, it's kind of a big deal because instead of focusing on every area, you could be super efficient and effective in one area. It used to be you had to have a huge circle of responsibility. right? And this is the area that you're responsible for. You had to take care of everything, right? I mean, farming and hunting and protecting and warrior and all of that. You had to be responsible for all of it. And what that meant was you had to also have a huge area of worry because you had to be worried about everything you were responsible for. And that's a lot. You know, I mean, that's a lot to worry about. It's a big deal. It's a stressful life because you were responsible for everything. The joy of specialization is that your area of responsibility has shrunken down dramatically, right? Now you're just responsible for, if you're a blacksmith, blacksmithing. You know, if it's not raining and the fields are drying up, that's not your concern. You're just worried about metal and forming it, right? It's pretty easy. It's simple because you specialize in this one thing. Your area of responsibility is shrunken dramatically. And if you're healthy, what that means is your area of worry is also much smaller because you only have to be worried about the things you're responsible for. You don't need to worry about as much. And that's good. This is a picture of a healthy mindset, right? It's a picture, an illustration of what a healthy mindset looks like in the age of specialization. This kind of life has allowed for generations of mental stability, right? It's allowed for people who have the luxury of leisure and free time. Did you know that the word leisure time, that phrase, did not exist until the early 1800s? It used to be most people had to work a modest 100 hours a week, dawn to dusk, every single day until they died at the ripe old age of 35, right? That was life for most people. But in the age of specialization, you know, when people had to, throttle back to just a mere 80 hours a week, they began having something called leisure time, where they could choose to do other things. We live in this vast period of luxury. We have a more simple life, and we're able to have more mental stability than most generations preceding us because we have a small area of responsibility and thus a small area of worry. Here's the point of my talk. The vast majority of our distraction issues come from our circle of worry not being the correct size. It's either too big or too small. And that's what I want to talk about today. What happens when your circle of worry is either too big or too small for your area of responsibility? Let's start by talking about it being too big. Now, as many of you know, we have experienced a rapid decline in mental health over the last 15 years. And it's certainly not because we have to work harder. I mean, technically, our work week has continued to become shorter, and I think we have a great deal of luxury that no other generation has dreamed of. We have access to so many things. We can learn so many things, and we can see so many things. I have had some younger people come up to me and be like, Pastor, technically, the youngest generation, because of the Great Recession, is actually poorer than their parents. And while technically, dollar for dollar, adjusted for inflation, that may be the case, our access of luxury, quality of life, way better. Let me give you some examples. When I was a kid, think about music. Okay, I remember when Bush came out with the song Glycerin. It was a great song. Now, the album Razor Blade Suitcase was total trash. But if I wanted to get Glycerin, I had to spend $15 at Media Play, which is a brick and mortar record store. You have no idea what that is, to get the CD so I could get this one song, right? When Nirvana Nevermind came out, which the entire album is excellent and amazing in musical perfection, I went and got that. Actually, this is true. I listened to some of these songs this week with my kids, and I was like, these are terrible. Like, I'm super depressed. But when I was young, it defined me, right? Alternative grunge is awful. Anyway, so I had my collection of 15 CDs, and they were like my most precious thing. I walked around with my little CD case, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. Be careful and whatever. And I had my old cassette tapes, too, and it was like $200 worth of music. Today, we have Spotify. Literally, you have $1 million, what was $1 million CD collection. No exaggeration. You have $1 million of music in your phone at all times. Like, that kind of music, if you were super uber rich, you'd have someone literally driving behind you in a box truck with all those CDs to, like, give you whatever you wanted. Like, that would be your life. And this is just our life. Think about movies, right? When you were a kid, it was like, you know why all my generation knows all the lines to Tommy Boy? Because that's the only VHS that we had. So you watched it like 59 times, like literally every sick day. That's just what you'd pop in and you'd like say all the lines because it's the only thing you had today. We have Netflix, we have Hulu, we have Disney Plus. I mean, all these different things, right? It's crazy. Or healthcare. Do you guys remember when old people were all just super cranky because they were always in pain because their joints hurt and whatever? Now it doesn't even matter if you have health insurance. You can get your knee replaced. You can get your shoulder replaced. My dad had an anterior hip replacement on a Friday, and he walked into church on Sunday. That's crazy, right? Don't give me your excuses, okay? Your hip's broken. I'll tell you what. Let me tell you about my dad. Now, here's the deal. We have all this great stuff. We have access to all these things. But the result is our area of awareness, our area of worry has really grown. And the problem is our area of responsibility is still the same size. And the result is our circle of worry is too big. And worry has become a distraction for our lives. Worry about things we could do nothing about. This right here, the difference in radius between this circle and this circle, all of this excess, this is called distraction. Anytime our focus is spending a large amount of time worrying about things we can't and probably never will control, it's a distraction. And examples abound, right? I worked very hard to pick some examples that hopefully will not offend many people, but I mean, it's just, you're gonna get offended probably, but who cares, okay? You do, obviously, and me too, but I just said who cares. Moving on, okay. I'm sure many of you heard of the terrible explosions in Beirut, right? 300,000 people were made homeless in an instant. A generation of prosperity was erased. One of the leading world globalized cities that was safe for Westerners in the Middle East was leveled. I spent in total many hours of my life agonizing about this, worrying about it, watching and reading it, seeing the videos. I was genuinely stressed, which I should be. When I see human suffering, I should have compassion. But here's the thing. Beirut, this is Beirut, okay, compared to my area of influence. It's solidly a good distance away from things I can do something about. It is way outside of my area of responsibility. But I've made it a part of my area of worry, which is extremely frustrating because I'm powerless to do anything about it. Meanwhile, I'm focused on this, right? I'm at home. I probably see my kids for honest to goodness. When I get home from work, I have probably 50 minutes with them prior to beginning the bedtime routine. And during that time, I'm literally watching Beirut explode, and I'm worried about it. I'm like, can you believe this? And blah, 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 blah. And I'm missing out on my core responsibilities right here, to be a father, to be a husband, to be an engaged dad, because I'm worried about this. How much of our life is spent worrying about these red dots? I just don't have enough time. I just don't have enough time because we're here. We're here. I'm distracted from my area of expertise and influence and responsibility doing something that makes me sadder, less productive, more frustrated, and less helpful. It's my life. Instead of focusing on what I can do something about, I'm focused on something I can't do anything about. And I think Satan robs so many of us of our destiny, of our calling, of our purpose in life, because we're here looking at all these different red dots. I see people do this with all these other things as well, right? All kinds of things. Like, here's one. This kind of blows my mind. Like, people who don't have school-age children and have really nothing, no connection with the school district are like, why are schools not opening? Why are schools opening? Why are masks required? Why aren't masks required? And it's like, wait. Everybody just calm down, okay? I mean, if you had a kid in school, you know what I mean? If you were like there, but maybe this would be here, but this is, you know what I mean? And post on Facebook about things and reasons. And I'll tell you what happens is unfollow. You know what I mean? Like all your friends just unfollow because it's, and here's the thing. You're distracted from what God has called you to do when you're focusing on these red dots, right? Here's one for me, politics. I am deeply engaged with politics. I kind of love politics. I hate politics, whatever, right? And I try to maintain a neutral air here because I think it's important. But listen, here's every American's responsibility and Christian's responsibility. You read. You get informed, right? We can all vote here. That's good. We should read. We should be informed. We should influence people in our life. As Christians, it's not a bad thing to stand up for what we believe in. But after that, we stop worrying. And when you're sitting here and you've already formed a belief and you're not going to move and it's whatever and it's solid and you're listening to these yellow journalists, right? It's like, Hannity? Okay, really? Don Lemon? Really? All it's going to do is make you madder. And at some point, once you know what you know, it's done. It's time to hang up the phone and say, I'm going to worry about this right here, right? Not these red dots over here. If it's robbing your life, you know what I mean? By allowing our area of worry and distraction to be like this, we contribute less to the world. We add worry to other people's lives, and we make our own lives worse. That's what we're doing. These red dots all over. Do you have any red dots in your life? Probably identifying them right now. Some of you are like, I just don't have the time. Really? We would have the time if we right-size this thing. Jesus has so much to say about this topic. In a part of his most famous sermon, if you've noticed, we've been going back to this Sermon on the Mount pretty frequently in the series. He speaks clearly about worry. Now, if you don't know, the Sermon on the Mount, which was a sermon that Jesus gave on a mountain, the Sermon on the Mount is several different little sermonettes put together. And you guys should be glad that I only preach one sermon a weekend. Jesus preached like 7 in the Sermon on the Mount. But the one we're going to look at is a sermonette on worry. And it's in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 34. And the way it's going to make the most sense to you guys is not verse-by-verse expository preaching. And I would do that because I like that the most. And this kind of is that way. But in a Jewish context, their thinking is best dissected with a Western mind by looking at the end, then going to the beginning, and then looking at the middle. Okay? It's just the way it's going to make sense to us the most. So that's what we're going to do. And if you disagree, go to seminary. No, just kidding. If you disagree, that's fine. Verse 34 says, Jesus says, so don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. And even if you don't believe that Jesus is God, that's a verse right there that you should probably write down, memorize, put on your vanity, think about. It's a great passage. Jesus is wise, obviously, brilliant, right? He's the most influential figure in human history, and women and children have him to thank for being considered more than property today, which is kind of cool. But Jesus is talking about tomorrow worries versus today worries. And in their day and age, they didn't have the weather app. You know what I mean? They couldn't tell what was going to happen tomorrow. There was no predicting. There were no analysts. Tomorrow was something that was completely out of their control. So Jesus says, when it comes to things that are way on the edge of, out here, way outside of your circle of responsibility, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. These are tomorrow worries, right? Instead, worry about today. You worry about the choice you're going to make today with your kids, with your wife, with your job, with your family. You worry about who you're going to be right now. That's the call that he gives to us. Jesus is telling us to take our circle of worry and right-size it to our circle of responsibility. He's calling us to this kind of life. And listen, it's not a guarantee that life will be perfect, but it's a reminder to worry about what we can influence, and we choose not to be distracted by other things we can't change. Austin, you can't control the price of grain tomorrow, right? You can't control if it's going to rain tomorrow. You can't control any of those things. You can't control who wears a mask or who doesn't. You can't control if it's a mandate or this or that or what happens and all these different things. Those are distractions from what you can control, which is who you're going to be in this moment, making wise choices and loving God and loving people. That's the call that God has placed on our lives. So God is calling us in this moment to focus on what we do have control over. This is not telling us, though, not to worry about nothing. And I think a lot of people, especially young people, read that passage and they're like, Jesus just says, send it. He just says, take that snowmobile and send it off and jump it. Who cares about it? That's not at all what he's saying. Okay? If you look at the context of this passage, right before this, he actually says, seek first the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. Then, tomorrow worry and today worry. And this is kind of remarkable right here. I remember as a kid reading that thinking, well, will he really give you everything you need? Because I know some people who have followed God who did not get everything they need. But I actually think it's kind of remarkable how true this passage is. I mean, Jesus lays out an ethos, morality, and code in the Bible that is actually the premier recipe to human success and life satisfaction. Like God's plan for human sexuality, God's plan for love, God's plan for finances, God's plan for gender, God's plan for all these different things statistically does lead to the highest level of life satisfaction, which is kind of remarkable that 2,000 years before sociological science would vindicate what Jesus teaches, he lays out a plan that is remarkable and also not what you would think would be normal, and yet it leads to life satisfaction. Furthermore, he says, seek the kingdom of God. And this is reinforcing the introduction to this whole passage, but he's telling you, a lot of you guys, you're worried about tomorrow, and he says, your vision is too small. You should be worried about tomorrow. You should be worried about eternity. He introduces this section of the sermon, this little sermonette right here in verse 19. We just read the end. Let's go back to the beginning. What he's doing is he's concluding what he started talking about. In verse 19, he says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and thieves break in and steal. Store your treasure in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. For wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Jesus says, look, there's a lot of things that you cannot control in life that are tomorrow worries. You can't control if a thief breaks into your house. You can't control if a pandemic ruins all your business plans for, all of 2020. You can't control if all your prized possessions are taken away from you in an event like a moth plague or something like that. You can't control those things. So instead, worry about a place that is totally just, where there are no disasters and everything is guaranteed. And that is heaven. Heaven is a place where God says all justice and fairness is there. Because of the grace of Jesus, we have access to it. And he says that's something that you do have 100% control in your life over. So that's something that you should invest in, right? That's what he's telling us right here. I love how clearly he demonstrates this principle. He says, focus on what you can control on. You need to right-size your circle of worry to what you actually are responsible for. And let me just tell you, as a 35-year-old man, I was writing this passage this week, and I was super, super convicted. And I have a bunch of applications that we're going to get to after I make my second point. My second point, obviously, you guys understand this, right? What do you do when your area of worry is too big? I also want to speak to a group of people who have an area of worry that is way too small. This is what apathy looks like. These are people who are like, nah, I just don't care about life. just going to sit here and not care. I love to not care. You know what I mean? My mom's basement is going to be here forever, and Star Wars pajamas are always in style. You know what I mean? Like, life is good, okay? Ramen noodles are nutritious and delicious. Everything is okay, right? I don't need to grow up. Fortnite is still available on the PC. So if I can't get it on my phone anymore, it's okay. It's okay. Everybody calm down, right? But here's what happens is when you let your circle of worry become too small, your circle of influence, expertise, and responsibility languishes and sometimes never develops. And what happens is you waste your life. And I just want to say that really clearly. This is a picture of what a life wasted looks like. And I think that's a pandemic in and of itself. In particular, what I see is culture telling us the lie that your 20-somethings are the only age that is worth living and the only age that is fun. And I think that's really sad because your 20-somethings are super important, but not in the way that you'd think. I mean, first of all, your 20-somethings are typically the most miserable years of your life. Okay, life satisfaction will peak for most people in their 50s as their kids are, growing up, grandkids, whatever, career pinnacle, all that stuff. Health is still there. But your 20s are not the funnest time of your life. A lot of times they're the hardest time of your life. And it's the most important time of your life to be in gear. What I hear society say a lot, and you've probably heard this, is 30 is a new 20. The implication is you just do whatever you want for your life. It's no big deal. You just have fun. Like, let me give you an example of this in our society, okay? This bothers me. It's a very cute store with great clothes, but this bothers me. This says, oh yeah, 21 is it. You just want to act like a 21-year-old forever. I do not want to act like a 21-year-old forever, and please don't do that, right? Your 20s are the single most important decade of your life. Your brain goes through a second and very, very bright period of neuroplasticity. What that means is in your early 20s, it is the last period of your life where you can actually learn and gain new skills. It's a biological fact. The neural pathways in your mind, for one final frenzied moment, become very plastic and developable. What that means is the skills that you gain in your early career, the relational habits that you form in that time period, the educational and financial choices that you make are patterns that will be cemented in your mind for the rest of your life. And they're critical. They're critical to forming those things like early when you're young. It's really, really important. And I see a lot of people say it doesn't really matter. I'll settle down when I'm older. No, no, no. If you're partying and making horrible relational choices throughout your 20s, it's very unlikely that you will be able to sustain a healthy relationship in your 30s, right? It's critical to the rest of your life. Even on a fertility level, I talk with people all the time who are like, well, I'll start having kids when I'm 30s. Okay, my last kid, true story, I almost got in a fight with our OB, but we're sitting in there, and OB looks at us and is like, yeah, so this is a geriatric pregnancy. And I said, you said what? Say it to my face, geriatric pregnancy. My wife looks great, geriatric, right? She's 32 years old. They're like, yeah, 32 years old. And it turns out culture has changed our reality, but science is science, right? And so often our feelings feel like facts, but they're not, and the biological reality was my wife was 32 and I wanted 6, 8, 10 more kids after that point. But our OB kind of laid out all the risk factors that we were looking at. And I sat down and thought, wow, I didn't realize all of these choices I had been making in my life. I never played that out. It was remarkable. And a book that I read this last week was really great. It was called The Defining Decade. And I've actually read this book twice. But this is written by Meg Jay. She's a PhD who is absolutely not a Christian. But what I find remarkable about this is she consistently reinforces the teachings of Jesus unintentionally. She's like, all the research we see says that living together before marriage is really destructive to your future. And it's really cool that she talks about this and all the data behind it. And just over and over again, consistently, she talks about how, following Jesus' plan is great. She never says it, but basically she tells us that this is a destructive way to live. Never developing your circle of influence and expertise because you are simply living in apathy is going to cause you to fall behind your peer group in a way that is irrecoverable. And that's a big deal. I want you to understand that. I'm not saying that you will have a miserable life if you're 30 and you've made some bad choices. It doesn't mean you'll have a miserable life, but it does mean that you will miss out on some of the potential that God placed in your life. It is so important that we get in gear in our 20s. And when young people are asked what they want most in life in this book, the vast majority, a huge percentage, say they want to be a good parent, and number 2, they want to be a good spouse. And it's so interesting that we make choices that don't move us in what we want most, in the direction of what we want most. And I think for so many people, the early 20s are spent partying and making relational choices that are super not satisfying. And it's interesting because if you are in your early 20s or you have lived through that and you made some choices that were probably not God's best, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You're doing these things and you just had the best night of your life and you come in and you're like, that was so unfulfilling. Yet for so many of us, this is what we do, right? Which brings me to the second definition of distraction. It's choosing what you want now in place of what you want most. I think this is a really, really common thing. And what Jesus is saying in this passage is avoid the temptation of being distracted by what you want now. He's calling us not to worry about tomorrow, right? But to worry about eternity. Live for what matters most. In Matthew 6:25, I love what he says here. He goes, that's why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food and drink and enough clothes to wear. Isn't that the 20-something thing? I want to look great. I want to have great food and great drinks. Yes. You know, and it's like, stop. Isn't life so much more than food and drink and clothing? It's so much more than these things. And yet this is what we live for. It's choosing what we want now in place of what we want most. He says, don't let your circle of worry become too small. Don't waste your life in apathy and silly parties. Don't waste your life dating around and having fun and doing all these things that are preparing you to live a destructive life later on. Don't mortgage the next 60 years of your life so that you can have a fun 20-somethings. Build a family. Live a great life. Don't mortgage what you want now for your future. I think one of the big things that I see here is people trying to avoid pain. People trying to avoid pain. And this is the way I explain it. Now, there's a new phobia. Many of you probably heard of this. Some of you haven't. But young people in particular have an extremely sharp fear of the dentist. And this is actually a really common fear among young people, which kind of blows my mind. But I know a lot of young people who don't go to the dentist, like many who don't go to the dentist. And I'm always thinking, like, not going to the dentist isn't going to cause the cavities to go away. What it's going to do is make them much more painful when you have to deal with them. Right? Like, you got to deal with the cavities now, otherwise they're going to get way worse. Similarly, avoiding critical life choices and paths we all must take isn't going to make them go away. It's just going to make you older and less adaptable when you do have to go down those roads. It's going to make the paths more painful and the cost of your future more painful. I think it's so interesting because so often we trade the dreams that we want in the future, a healthy, successful, vibrant marriage with generation after generation that loves God and loves people, for a few fun moments now. It's like, that's not God's best. And listen, there's grace. If you've made bad choices, I want you to know God is a loving God, full of grace and mercy and quick to forgive. But listen, I want to challenge you to walk in God's wisdom and ways. And if you're living this life that's just like, I don't care, I'm just going to send it. You know, it's Friday, and I'm going, and I'm playing darts and having fun and shooting skee ball and pool and all this all the time. I'm not saying those things are bad, but if that is a desire of your life right now, you're missing out on something that God has for you that could be really important. Jesus goes on in verse 26. He says, look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And this is a part that doesn't make sense in the context of the entire passage to Western eyes. Jesus goes on and he says, look at the lilies of the field. Solomon in all his splendor doesn't look as great as these lilies do, right? And what he's doing is he's picking out two of the most beautiful things in life. And he's saying, these things are fleeting. Even if you get everything you want, these things are super fleeting, right? Let me show you a picture. I was walking into work the other day, and I saw the front of Elisa's truck, and I noticed something that was added to it. Everybody who hears this story about birds would think, man, these birds are the most beautiful thing in God's creation. And they fly. They literally fly. How amazing would that be? And yet their life is so finite. They're a reminder that this life ends. The beauty of a lily in the field is so fleeting. They have the finest clothing. And eternity is still coming. Jesus, in telling us this story, is reminding us, don't trade what you want most for what you want now. That's a distraction. I just want to call people, old and young, to really think about how you're investing your life right now. Right now. Are you living for what matters most? As we wrap this up, there are the two types of people that I want to challenge, right? And let's start with people whose mind looks like this. And you know who you are. You have a worry that is too big. And I want to make it clear here, I think Christians should be informed. I think we should be engaged with the world. I'm not telling you that you should stick your head in the sand and ignore everything. But if most of your mental capacity is spent on the red dots, it's spent in the space that you have no influence or control over, you're wasting your life. And if this is you right now, I just want you to say inside of your head, I don't want you to say it out loud. If you're watching online at the jail campus, just inside of your head, if this is you, I want your little mental voice to admit it to yourself. I want you to say right now in your mind, I'm wasting my life. I'm doing it. I'm wasting my life. Let that sink in for a moment. Our life is so valuable. We are so privileged beyond measure. We live in the greatest country in human history during the most prosperous time in human history. Yet for so many of us, we're not making progress, and it doesn't feel very good because we're distracted from the calling that God has given to us. I want to ask you this question. What areas of your life is your circle of worry too large? And how can you shrink it down? And listen, this church isn't about an interesting message. I don't want you to leave being like, oh, those circles, that was pretty cool. That bird in Elisa's grill, that was great. I want you to actually talk about how your life is going to change, okay? If you're single, you journal about it. That's what I did, right? When I didn't have any friends and I went to church by myself, like, I would journal about it because I didn't want to just show up and do nothing. I wanted to be changed by it, right? For me, I wrote down a few things. Number one, maybe it's time for me to admit I'm not an epidemiologist, okay? I mean, I have some pretty strong opinions. I'm a smart guy, and I look at this, and I'm like, the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate are far lower than we thought, and we're overreacting, and what's going to happen? I mean, Europe's rising again, and all these things, and all these policies. This is ridiculous, and the economy, right? I'm going crazy. I'm like, wait a minute. I know things, but I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not in public office. I don't have a degree in public health. So I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to enjoy my life. And I know what I know. But I am not going to let my concerns about that rob me of the joy that I have there. That's just something I wrote down. Here's another one. This is for whoever it's for. But maybe it's time to admit we're not a CIA agent. You're not Mitch Rapp. You're not Jack Ryan. You're not James Bond. You're not Jason Bourne. And there might be a conspiracy that you see, but God has not placed us in a position to stop that. And maybe you know about it, and you know what you know. Maybe you stand and you protest and you do these things, and I'm not saying that's bad. And there are some times in our life where we have an obligation to do that. But if you're in a place in your life where your life is consumed by something that you have no control over, and you're abdicating your responsibility to be a father, a husband, a mother, a wife, to do whatever it is that God has called you to do, it's time to reallocate some of that worry to your core responsibilities. That's all I'm saying. Maybe it's time to admit you're not a school board member. I just want to say to our school administrators who have gone through what is easily the most difficult time in a generation, we love you, we support you. My daughter's superintendent, his name is Devin Brinks. We pray for him daily. I think about him often. And I just want to say to all the people who are in public positions of leadership, I believe that you're doing the best you can with what you have. And I may disagree with you, but I am not going to get way outside of my area of responsibility and ruin your life. And I just want to say that. And we vote, and we act, and we whatever, and we speak out. But there's a place where this has become idolatry and a distraction from our calling. I want us to take our life back. I want us to stop living in frustration and worry with our wheels spinning. And I think that's how a lot of us feel. Our wheels are spinning. When your circle is too big, your circle of worry is too big, it just feels like you don't have any traction in life. I want to challenge you to focus on your area of responsibility, and you're going to get some traction. I mean, how much better a community would this be if all of us together as a church at all of our services resolved to focus on loving God and loving people the way that He calls us to? Like, I guarantee you, if all of us together as a community did that, we would see a radical change in this community. As a people, it would do so much more than so many of the things we've been focused on. Then there are those of us who have a circle of worry that is way too small. We're living in apathy and distraction. Jesus says we need to think bigger. He says we need to stop trading what we want most for what we want now. Eternity matters. And I just want to ask all of you, are you living a life that focuses on what matters most? Or is your circle of worry too small? And listen, if you don't believe in God, I'm not superstitious, and I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, right? I decided very young, I was like, man, I look at all the data, and even though I feel like I don't like God, and at that time I didn't, I made a decision to submit my life to Him because my feelings don't supersede the reality of God. And I just want you to hear, you might be apathetic towards God. You will 100% stand before the God of the universe right after you die and leave this world. And I mean, I could sit here and talk about all the apologetic reasons for that. But I want to challenge you, especially young people right now, to really, really think about your life priorities and really, really ask yourself, are you living a life that reflects the reality that God is real? Are you just not worried? It's a problem. If you're 23 and you're living on your parents' insurance with no plan to get a meaningful career, it's time to make a plan. It's time to do something. Eternity is coming. And I wrote down a few things in my life that might be helpful for you. Number one, when I was young, I chose to get rid of all media that I didn't need. So we don't have Netflix, we don't have a TV, we don't have Disney Plus, we don't do any of those things. We don't have TikTok. And it's just been really helpful. People ask me all the time, like, John, how do you do so much? I don't really do that much. It's just I gave up all the things. Like, I had a big issue with sports and anger management. Like, I was flipping chips over, these SEC games that, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Why am I ruining my months with this and consuming? I would watch every snap of every Big 12 and SEC game on fast forward on my TiVo. It's like, this is ridiculous. I have an issue. I want to focus on what matters most, right? So I did that. The other thing I wrote down is I had a mentor tell me, he said, hey, you're the average of your 5 closest friends, right? You will be the average of them. And really think about who they are and what they're doing. And if you're in these relationships right now where, all your friends are fighting and blowing up and the police are getting called and all these relationships that are crazy and every single night and it's still 3 a.m. and they call you and come out and all this stuff, I think it's time to maybe have a sit down with your friends and say, we need to think about where our life is going. And I just want to call us to better because I love you. And if we're going to keep going down this road, I'm going to just say right now, I'm not going down it with you anymore. It's time for us to change. I want to challenge you to do that. And then lastly, for old and young, I want to challenge you to make a timeline. If you're 60 years old right now and you're saying, I'm going to do this when I'm older, you might really want a timeline what that's going to look like. Because when you're 80, backpacking across the country, probably not. You know what I mean? Like that's something that probably needs to happen sooner rather than later. I talk with a lot of young people who say, I will settle down when I'm 30. Well, let's timeline that together. If you're 30 with no degree and a lifestyle not conducive to a serious relationship, it's going to take 5 years to get a degree, an internship while working and paying for it. It's going to take 2 years to get started in a career, and you can't start dating before that because you're not yet the person you're looking for is looking for. If you want to catch a quality person, you got to be a quality person. Then 1 year for a serious relationship, 1 year for engagement and marriage, and then 1 year before you start having kids. Now you're 40 years old. 40 years old. I think a lot of us, we don't really sit down and actually think about the timelines of our lives. We just live in apathy. God calls us to focus on the core responsibilities of our life. I just think, what would happen if this church, if this group of people looked at all the problems in the world and said, God, we are really going to focus intensely on dealing with what you've entrusted us with. I think about the parents whose babies we baptized today. Each of them is focusing on what God has entrusted them with. And we can worry about all these other things. But I look at those children, and I look at these parents focused on raising kids who love Jesus. And I'm like, that's something that God's entrusted you with. Let's do this together. Let's change the world together. Let's focus on what God has called us to focus on. And let's make the world a better place to be. I'm going to read this to you real quick. Matthew 6 and verse 19 says, don't store up treasure on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and thieves break in and steal. But instead, store your treasure in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. For wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. And he concludes his message saying, seek the kingdom of God above all else, and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow brings its own worries. Today has enough trouble of its own. Let's pray together. Jesus, as a church and community, we choose to take responsibility for what you've entrusted to us. We choose to live for the calling you've placed on our lives. God, I ask that each person who is hearing this voice today would choose and resolve to love you and to love people around us. We thank you for the responsibilities you've entrusted us with, and we choose to steward them well. I pray that because of this message, we would see more engaged fathers, more engaged mothers, children focused on the calling that you have on their lives. I look at a broken, hurting world, and I just pray that you would use people in this room taking responsibility for what we're responsible for to bring about a dramatic healing. Thank you for all you are. In the name of Jesus, we pray. All God's people said, amen. I want to ask you guys to stand. In just a second, we're going to go into a song, but please stand. Please have a discussion about this. Like, I don't care who you talk with, whether it's yourself, you sit in the mirror, you talk with you, journal, you talk with your family, fathers, mothers, wives, like, lead your family into discussion and really choose, how is our life going to change? What areas of our life are going to change because of this? Church is not an emotional experience. It's a transformational one. So let's be transformed. Let's sing together as the band leads us.